Okay, so we're working focusing on today with the functional lines. So where this is way in module 3, it's one of the last groups of lines that we look at. But essentially everything you learn in module 1 is basically how the body works, how it is always adapting, and how it's using the information we get it within movement, and how we use our body and all of that. It's using that information to build its tissues and its capabilities, right? We look at capacity in module 1, and capacity being a combination of structure, function, and pain or discomfort, right? Because that prevents us from expressing our full capacity. So, we're looking at that and that kind of thing in module 1. Some of these concepts like adaptation, super important for anybody who teaches movement or anybody who has a body to understand. And then, we start looking at the structures themselves, right? The tissues themselves in module 2. And then when we look at module 3 and the function and the fascial lines, I'm showing you why organization and activation works, and why if we use the body as a tensegrity structure by using tension forces generally, we're going to have better outcomes. Okay, and so this all has to do with what should our focus be in the practice to get a better outcome, and what's our priority, right? We looked at stability, then strength and mobility. So, there are certain concepts, and in module 3, they all come together because I can give you a bunch of information, but as a teacher, passing that information on to your students or working with that information to build classes, you need to know the whys. So, if you don't know the whys, then I think, it's hard to remember things. Like for me, if I don't understand why I would take a certain action or why I should accept a concept, if I don't know the why, then it's very hard for me to accept or make use of it in any kind of a way. So what I would really like for you guys to be able to do is understand the whys. And then I think it's going to give you a lot of creative ideas. If you understand the whys, when you go to problem solve with specific students, you're going to know, it will give you direction. So I know that probably sounds all conceptual right now, but as you move through the course, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to show you the principles and then have you understand them so well that it helps you apply them. It helps you come up with your own ideas as to how to apply them. I'm happy to show you a whole bunch of stuff. But, when you're there with a specific client or, teaching a specific group of people, then if you know the whys, you'll be able to come up with a way to get good outcomes for them. Knowing priorities, knowing how the body adapts, and knowing how to work with that. Okay? So now that I've said that about module 3, we're working with the fascial lines. And that is kind of what makes our body a tensegrity structure rather than something with a bunch of hinges and that kind of joint. We have this network of communication that our body really is. And so, working with all of these lines helps us tap into that particular quality of the body, and we do get better outcomes. So let's go on to our next slide. I'm not sure if I can change this slide. I should be able to? Okay, great. So I again, just want to sort of set the groundwork for newer people especially, but what does tensioning or activating, as we say, the fascial lines help us do in our practice or our movement life in general, right? Because, when we're practicing on our mat, that's not the only time we do movement, right? We have a life, right? We move around in our life and we have tasks to do and, other activities that we like to do. So how is understanding how to tension and activate the fascial lines helping us in our practice and our movement life? And how is that different than a mainly stretching kind of practice? Because there's a really big difference. So fascial tensioning helps us stabilize our joints, right? It helps us hold our postures. If we're moving dynamically, it helps that be a more coordinated movement. And we're doing it in positions that respect the way our joints are made. and they're more efficient, right? So it's not just about aesthetics, it's about like efficiency of movement so we're not causing damage. Okay. And then we systematically, the system that I've developed here is systematically and reliably helps us develop our stability, then our strength, then our mobility. And in this course, I like to refer to mobility as sort of an upgrade called range of control, right? We want to have control over our range of motion. And maybe we want to have a lot of range of motion. I mean, it is yoga. A lot of us, naturally have a lot of range of motion or are trying to develop our range of motion, and that's fair. But we want to have good control over that range, right? We don't want to lose our proprioceptive sensitivity or anything. And then it also helps us develop movement skill, right? So that we can apply these skills to other activities that we do. And we go from, more collapsed type of positions, which we could naturally fall into, to more of range of control positions, that we actually have mastery over. So now, again, until you get through learning about the nervous system and everything, it's hard to understand what I'm talking about, but some of you might. When I say that tensioning or activating the fascial lines improves proprioception, okay, so that's the nervous system. When our fascia is being tensioned in movement or postures, our nervous system is getting more of the information it needs to hold you or move you through that position. Okay, so it makes, there's more information being shared between body and brain. Okay, and then that gives you better joint control, these activations. And then you develop movement habits, right? If you keep doing things a certain way, it becomes habitual, and that's good. We do want good movement habits. And then, it's those things that are not necessarily always conscious, right? When you develop a habit, it sort of becomes unconscious. So this is just the way you move now. And that is really the thing that prevents injury. It's going to build your tissues, it's going to build healthier tissues that resist being injured. And it's going to ensure better long-term benefits from the practice. Okay, so, we haven't really, I think, thought too much in yoga about long-term benefits. What does the practice do for us 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now? And that's where I'm taking you. I really want you to understand the influence and the power actually that you have over those long-term outcomes. Okay? So I hope you find that exciting. So I have a couple images here, and I'm showing you, when you sort of do a letting go, stretching focused kind of practice, you end up hanging, it can't be helped, okay? It can't be helped. You're going to hang on your joint tissues. And usually the purpose of that is to get them to stretch. And that could lead to potential injury. It definitely doesn't build, as I said just now, proprioception, joint control, movement habit. It doesn't do any of that. It doesn't improve your balance. It can make it more difficult to balance. So that's why we don't want to hang on our joint tissues. Now, if you're somebody who has developed proprioception, good joint control, good balance, you've developed your tissues, then sure, go ahead and hang on your joints. You'll be fine. But most of our students are not there. They have not been building their tissue systematically, understanding good joint positions and all of that, right? So that is not a good place for them to start. That I think a lot of people think that I just, these gentle stretches and all of that are sort of innocuous. You can't get injured doing that, but that's kind of gives you a false sense of security because it's not building your tissues. So that's an important distinction, okay? If you've built your tissues and all these other capacities, then yeah, hang out on your joints if you want. No problem. It's not going to hurt you. Okay, so contrary to that, or instead of that, we're focusing on doing things like this. We're directing our energy upward, right? We're pressing into the feet and drawing the energy up the legs, up the trunk of the body. So there's an upward lifting energy we're working with. By pressing down, we rise up. And it's through this fascial tensioning that I teach, which is, organization and activation. We learn the hand to core, foot to core connection, make the body one piece. Those are all ways of drawing the energy up through the tissues of the body and strengthening them, posture by posture, class by class. This is building your tissue strength. And again, it optimizes your joint position and it improves your sensitivity to your position and all of that good stuff, okay? But it feels like we're directing the energy upward. All right, so that is kind of a bit of a, just giving you sort of the groundwork, the whole reason we're doing it this way, okay? Just again, since we are in module 3. Okay, so today our focus is the functional lines. Now, the functional lines, and I'm going to talk you through them in a moment, but just so you know, they're not full body lines. Okay, these are different than the other 5 full body lines that we've taken a close look at so far. Okay, these are different, and I'm kind of excited to explain how different they really are. So these functional lines, all our lines have a shorthand name, and the functional lines shorthand name is the strength and power lines. Okay, and that's because they include larger global muscles. Now, again, not to confuse, we're talking about fascial lines, but the fascial lines have basically pockets of muscles within them, or they encase muscles, and the muscles contract and pull on the lines, and that's how we get tensioning of the fascial lines. So in these particular fascial lines, the muscles that are within that line are larger, what we call global muscles. They are a different kind of muscle. And I'll go into that in some detail, so I'll just say that much for now. But they really help us when we're holding poses for longer, or we're doing something like an inversion, or something that's a really tricky, demanding balancing pose, or something like that. Now, I know that might make it sound like, well, I'm teaching seniors, so that's not for them. And that would not be the right way to think about it, because everybody needs to train these muscles. It's just going to maybe look a little bit different, for certain groups of people. So we're talking about strength and power muscles. Now, these are not muscles that we use for ambulation or walking, okay? We looked at the superficial back line, superficial front line, the lateral lines, and the spiral lines especially, and then the deep front line. These are full body lines, and their whole purpose is upright posture and walking. And then, of course, some of them do, these rotational movements or other things too. But remember that, uprightness and walking with long strides, those are the primal basic human movements, and squatting, I guess I would include with that. Okay, so these muscles are not really about that. These are the ones that are going to help us like lift things, carry things, swing rackets, throw, climb, trees, ladders, any kind of climbing, and things like sprinting or other large range of motion movements, which I'll show you. So, things like this. So this is a bigger range of motion rather than being upright, right? Because I'm taking the leg into a big range of motion, hip flexion and hip extension and arms overhead. So any postures where you're kind of going to the end of your range, you're doing a full range, which we do a lot in yoga. These muscles have to be turned on. So, yoga turns out to be a really good way to train these muscles. We don't have to do jumping and sprinting. We can actually train these muscles in yoga, and it's quite a natural thing for us to do because we do these big range of motion postures. And we do lots of balancing and stuff, so that these muscles have to turn on. You'll come to see the value of that here. Okay, they also lengthen and strengthen our levers, which are our arms and legs, right? So, if we just use our other muscles, are more, I want to say intrinsic, but they're postural muscles, they're just not as robust and strong potentially. They have a lot of endurance and they do turn on all the time, but without using these larger global muscles, you're going to be limited in the kind of tasks you could complete without that extra help. So they lengthen and strengthen the levers, the arms and legs, so basically shoulders and hips. And they also create this cross-body stability. Okay, so, if you're doing a single leg standing balance, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but if you can tap into the relationship between, your right shoulder and your left hip and your left shoulder and your right hip, you're going to be a lot more stable. And it's because you're using these functional muscles that have this cross-body connection. So, you can tap into that without even realizing that's what you're doing, of course. Okay, so, again, if we think about our order of priority in working with our students or teaching anybody a new skill or new posture, new practice, all levels and all types of students need to know how to stabilize first. Now, your functional lines can help you stabilize, but they can't do that on their own. It's kind of got to be initiated by the postural muscles, which I'll talk about in a moment. So stability first. This is just, if you can remember that, work on stability first. It doesn't matter who the student is, doesn't matter what level they're at, doesn't matter what sort of maybe injuries or other limitations they're working through. Stability of their joints is the first priority, okay? And we can learn that we can do that, improve that in all kinds of different ways in our yoga practice. And, we're going to look at that. And if you have a specific question about that, you can feel free to ask it. Okay. So, you're not going to worry about like postures like these until you've developed stability in more manageable postures. Okay, so postures like these, this is not what you're going to teach a beginner or a senior or somebody who's new to yoga. Maybe they do other sports, but they're new to yoga. These won't be the first things you teach because they'll just be a mess. They'll be all over the place. They need to know how to stabilize a more basic posture and position first. Okay, so it doesn't really matter. And if you're teaching an advanced yogi a new pose, you're going to make sure they can stabilize before they start loading. Right? And that's why we do stability first, then strength, and then we work on increasing our range, right? Increasing the size of the movement or the range of motion we have around the joint or whatever. Or a lot of people just think of it as going deeper. So if you can stabilize first, then move into strength, and then move into more mobility if you want to or need to. Okay, so any posture that goes into a larger range of motion actively, not passively, but actively, is going to ask those functional lines to turn on. Anything that asks for a little bit extra, you're going to be using your functional lines. So let's look at those more specifically now. Yeah. Okay. So where are they located? The front functional lines are on the front side of the body. And we basically, we have a primary and a secondary functional line. Now, I'm personally I'm going to, show you the difference, but I personally just think about the front fascial lines as one unit because it's not helpful in teaching movement to talk about the distinction. Nobody cares. And it's not useful at all because what you really want to focus on is like, what do I do with the front functional lines? Like, how does that help me in a posture or whatever? So let me show you the two functional lines. Now, altogether, there's three, two on the front, one on the back. And this primary one that we'll look at first on the front side starts with the lower edge of pectoralis major. So that's your big chest muscles. And if you look at pec major, we have a few muscles like that. You're going to see on the back side too. It's kind of spread out, right? See how it fans out and it gets really narrow here where it attaches to the arm bone, but it's got a broad, what we would say a broad origin. So any muscles that are shaped like that, it's almost a guarantee that part of the muscle is going to do one thing and part of the muscle is going to do something else. And that's the case here. So when we look at the pectoralis major as part of the front functional line, it's mostly the lower edge. So this lower half of the functional line, is part of the functional line. The upper half has more to do with the arm lines, okay, which we'll look at next time. Okay, so we've got this lower edge of pectoralis major, and then it attaches to the sternum at the lower part, and then down the rectus abdominis. So when we talk about a sheath, in Module 2, you'll hear that a sheath is a connective tissue structure. So, and you can sort of see like the fascia here on your superficial abdominal muscle, it really looks like some pockets, right? Chiclets of muscle within fascia. And that's exactly what it's like. It's like a sheath of fascia with some pockets of muscle. So that's the continuing on with the front functional line. And then it goes down right to the pubic bone. And I think we've seen like this pubic bone rectus abdominis right before. We're going to talk about that in a moment. And then it continues over. So you see it kind of tacks on to the pubic bone and then goes onto your big thigh bone, the femur. So that adductor is, one of the muscles that squeezes your legs together. And if you, just lift your one leg in front of you, or even where you're sitting, and you turn your knee out to the side so you can kind of access the inner part, it's the muscle, this longest muscle is the one that pops out the strongest. So it's really easy to find. So those are the main structures on this primary functional front line. And we have some overlaps, right, with other lines. So we've seen this over and over again. Every time we look at a new line, we see, okay, well, it overlaps with a couple of lines. I think the only place we didn't really see that, except at the foot, was the deep front line, right? So this functional lines also overlap with other lines. So the pectoralis major muscle is part of the arm lines, but as I say, more the upper aspect of it. The lower aspect is more part of the functional line. Again, if you don't remember this stuff, don't worry about it. I just talk about it because I think it's also fascinating. Rectus abdominis is part of the superficial front line too, right? So we see this reflected in two lines, superficial front line and the functional line. And you're going to see very interesting characteristic of the rectus abdominis in a few slides from now. Okay, and the adductor longus, this muscle down here, is also part of the deep front line because all of the adductors, all of the muscles that are in here are part of the deep front line, which is our myofascial core. Okay? All right. Okay, now we'll look at the secondary one. Now, again, it's secondary front line, and we've got these external obliques, which, you could put your thumbs in there right now at the after the ribs, above the iliac crest here. Put your fingers in there. Those are your external obliques, and that's part of the secondary functional front line. And then it tacks onto the crest here on the bone, the crest, and then this is anterior superior iliac spine, or a lot of people just call it ASIS for short. You don't have to remember that. Don't worry about it. And then you have this great long muscle, the sartorius, that goes right from that hip pointer basically to the inner aspect of your knee, just below the knee joint on your tibia bone. So you've got that big long muscle. So again, I think it works to think of, that just along with the functional line because they don't do different things. They all do the same things. They all create this cross-body connection is what they do, attaching your, right shoulder to your left leg, left shoulder to your right leg. That's what they do. They create that cross-body connection, and they do that all together, so we don't have to think of them in separate pieces. So again, we're going to see some overlap, and this is called the ipsilateral front line. So if you want to learn a new word today, ipsilateral means on the same side. Ipsilateral means on the same side. Okay, so that's what this line is. It's the ipsilateral front functional line. So if you want to show off with your friends, just remember that. All right, now, so I talked you through that. Now, just I want to make a point here about, remember these overlaps that we see in the line. Some people think that, that the lines should be completely distinct from each other, but we're looking at the body as a tensegrity structure, and these overlaps are consistent with tensegrity structures. Let me see. Can I get mine? Just destroy the place. So a tensegrity structure, we would see like overlap. See how these all come together at the dowels. So you're going to have multiple places where things kind of converge and spread out. So that is consistent with a tensegrity structure. And that helps, this kind of web-like structure that a tensegrity structure is, it helps it transmit force, right, throughout the whole structure. We don't transmit forces in our body in just one tiny place at a time. It always has a broad effect. We learned that in the experiential exercises in module 1 and 2, I believe. So that's, when we look at tensegrity specifically. And the other thing it helps is to share the load, right? So when we have, when we're working with any kind of resistance or, any effort is required, the body prefers to share the load throughout the system. That's why we distribute tension throughout the whole system. Okay, and these overlaps help that to happen. Okay, that's part of our tensegrity structure. Make sure you're stopping me if you have any questions. Okay.
Yeah,
we're good.
In the chat.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go on to the back functional line. This is all going to come together. And we'll talk about postures and stuff, but we'll just talk about the back functional lines right now. And that begins at the latissimus dorsi. So again, we have this gigantic muscle on both sides. Lots of fascia here in the low back that it connects into. And again, this is a muscle that has a really broad origin. See? It converges into this very small insertion point on the upper arm, but it spreads out. So that means it can do a number of things. So this front edge, not to split hairs too much, but this front edge is going to help the front body in, the front functional line, whereas most of the back is going to operate on the back functional line. And what it's doing is connecting opposite shoulder to hip. We have these cross body connections. And we come down here to glute max, med, and min, which actually on this diagram should extend way over to here. But this is just glute max. We see a broad origin again. Okay, so that means, these fibers can do different things. Okay, but in this case, as part of the functional line, it's mainly, again, connecting this leg and hip to the opposite shoulder. And it comes down into the vastus lateralis muscle, which is part of the group of the 4 quadriceps. Everybody knows what their quads are, right? And we always think of them as being on the front of the thigh, but vastus lateralis is really on the side of the thigh. Okay, and it extends the knee, just like the other quadriceps, but it really assists in this hip flexion action that this skeleton is doing right now. So it's part of the rear functional line and helps make this cross body connection from legs and hip to shoulder and arm. Okay, and again, these muscles are really going to be asked to come online when you're doing something that's a little bit more, a little bit more than activities of daily living kind of thing. When you need a little bit more, you're staying in a posture for longer, holding a position. That's when these guys really need to help you out. Now, we have an overlap with the superficial front line. Again, see, this is a muscle that's on the side of the leg, but it's part of the group of quadriceps. And the quadriceps are part of the superficial front line. So it's part of that as well. Okay, so, but otherwise, these functional lines, they lay over top of a whole bunch of other muscles that are part of other lines. Okay, but these are the over top ones. And again, they're really for those larger global movements, connecting opposite shoulder to hip. So that's really the key way that you're going to feel these muscles get kicked in. Or personally, I really like give my students some experiences where they're going to really feel the difference if they press back with one shoulder and opposite hip, or make a strong connection between those two, like in a balancing pose or something like that, because it really keeps you steady. It makes a pose that you might have been very awkward and jumping around in quite a lot. It makes you, boom, really steady. And I can tell you that students love to feel steady. They love to feel stable and balanced in their practice. It lets them know, on a subconscious level, the nervous system is much happier because it knows it's in control and it knows it's stable. Okay, so this actually reduces anxiety for people who suffer with anxiety conditions. If they did like stability training, they would reduce their anxiety. So, it's very important to help your students get there. And we can do that systematically. It's not moving. Okay. All right. So now when we looked at all the other full body lines, we looked at their postural function, and then we looked at their movement function, and they pretty much all have both. Whereas these functional lines don't really have a postural function. Okay, and there's a good reason for that. So these lines are not sort of the thing that's holding you up, right? Like if you're standing around just on two legs, you don't really need your phasic muscles to kick in. Now you might if you were standing for hours and hours, but just ordinarily, you don't really need them to kick in. Now, if you went to standing on one leg, then you would need them to kick in, right? You know that. So, or if we're doing something that's more than just standing, or how you walk around in your house? Do you walk with long strides and swing your arms? Not really, right? You just sort of moving a couple steps here and a couple steps there and everything, and that's not really like walking. I know people count the steps, but real walking is walking with long strides and arms swinging and all of that. That's like human being walking. Now you would use functional lines at some point, especially if you were walking rapidly or walking up a hill or climbing stairs or things like that, then you would definitely be using your phasic muscles for that. But again, like just moving about the house or about the office or things like that, you're rarely going to use your functional lines for that kind of thing. So I think I may have been saying phasic already, so I'm letting the cat out of the bag a bit early, but I'm going to explain all of that in a lot of detail. Okay, so the functional lines, again, they don't really have a postural function. They're about movement, like strong movement, larger movement, and then strength and power. And they help us create the arm to core connection. So, all the lines we've looked at so far do not include the arm lines. So those are being last. But the functional lines really help secure the arm into the shoulder and onto the trunk of the body. The functional lines are going to help us do that. And they're a big part of how we use organization and activation, especially for the arms. Okay, and they're going to transfer tension across the body, as I keep saying, from opposite shoulder and hip. And they do that in the front and the back body. Same thing, cross-body connection. Now, I know it sounds like, no postural function, but like I say, we have 5 full body lines that take care of our postural need. Upright posture is pretty demanding. We're bipedal. We're not on all fours generally. So, upright posture is quite demanding. And so we have a structure and muscle and fascial system that supports that. But when you're going to do, like I say, climbing stairs or running or walking rapidly with arm swinging, now you're going to start using your phasic muscles. And, anything that requires speed, doing an activity quickly, or, you can see this fellow over here is loading his right leg, and he's more using his ipsilateral front functional line there. And then she's doing crossbody action, right? So she's using her primary functional front line. So again, these lunging actions are fast acting, and, getting a ball, hitting a ball, that's fast acting. So, those are things that would ask for your functional lines to kick on. So let's look now at phasic and Postural. Huh?
Well,
okay.
This might lead into it.
Okay.
Aylin, sorry, I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation. Are these functional line muscles the so-called deep muscles, and is it possible to make them get longer as well as stronger?
Okay. Interesting question, Aileen. I am going to address this, and I'm probably going to really surprise you. So these are not deep. These are superficial. All of the functional front and back lines are superficial. All of our full body lines, they, especially the deep front line, all those structures are deep. But even the superficial back line, they have superficial in their name, but they have some very deep muscles as well, okay? And lateral lines are a bit more superficial. Spiral line, again, there's some deeper muscles in there too. But the functional line, they're all superficial. These are all right under your skin, okay? Right under your skin. Even here, like we could pinch that right at the side, right under your skin. This is latissimus dorsi again. Sartorius, right under your skin. Your pecs, these are the pecs that are right under your skin. This is your most superficial abdominal layer of muscle, and adductor longus. These are all very superficial muscles. These are not deep muscles. And they all are phasic muscles. Here's a word, phasic. Now, we're going to look at phasic muscles. And then I'll whether you want them to be longer or not, we'll answer that question in the in the course of this. Okay, so now where did we get these words from? Phasic and postural muscles. This is actually a concept put forth by Dr. Vladimir Janda. Yeah, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but in about the 1970s, and he was really considered to be way ahead of his time. Nobody was thinking about the body like this. But through observation and clinical research and working with actual patients, he started to understand that there was a relationship between how muscles function on different sides of the body, and noticed some very, very typical imbalances between muscle groups. So he kind of worked out this concept of postural and phasic, and it's kind of based on what they naturally do in the body. Everybody would have these same patterns, okay? And, he worked out a concept that basically helps us prioritize certain types of movement, in our practice or in any movement practice, to prevent injury and get better outcomes. And I think this is going to connect a lot of dots for you. So what would happen if we just sort of followed our sort of natural tendencies all the time? We would probably, especially the way we live our lives now. Okay, so let me make that distinction first. Except for people who are, practicing yoga every day or have another movement practice that they do very regularly and consistently, most people spend their day sitting, standing, and then lying down. And so there's no opportunity to balance strengths and weaknesses in their body. So their body is just going to kind of succumb to its own natural tendencies. Now, everything the body does is in support of you. Everything. So in attempting to support you, it will just maintain the capacities that you use. If all you do is sit, stand, and lie down, it will serve you by, building your tissues and making sure that you can do those movements. But if you do yoga and you do these big full body movements, take your joints through their full range of motion, deepen your breath, and challenge your tissues and your joints, your body is going to serve you by preserving and maintaining and maybe improving your ability to do those things, because that is how it is made. That's all it can do, is what you ask it to do. If you don't ask it to do anything except sit, stand, and lie down, it's going to succumb. It's going to get weak, right? And it's going to get pulled into its own natural tendencies, which those natural tendencies would serve you if you were really using your body like as it was designed to be used. So let's look at what are the differences between predominantly, and this word predominantly is important, okay, because the body literally defies being categorized in a very strict manner, okay? There's always like some gray areas. So all we can look is we can just generalize and say like predominantly postural type muscles have these characteristics. Now you can always train your muscles to do things that they're not naturally predisposed to do. You can, with consistent, persistent training, you can change these things. But, just as you naturally, the natural state, certain muscles that are postural in nature, they have these certain characteristics. And then we'll compare that to the phasic muscles, okay? So you're going to have certain muscles that are predominantly phasic. So postural and phasic. Now, just depending on the characteristics, we're going to bring in a bit more understanding, hopefully. Okay, so let's compare them. So postural muscles tend to be anti-gravity, right? So they're going to activate in response to gravity. They're going to have a higher resting tone as well. So that means they tend to, it's not as easy for them to relax. They're always going to be a little more hyperactive because they're the muscles that hold you upright. That's their job. Okay, so they're going to have, and when I say a higher resting tone, it means that they will naturally feel tighter. Okay, I'm going to use the word tighter. I don't like that word all that much, but it's tone actually is a better word, but most people understand tighter. They kind of can relate to how that feels. So postural muscles are naturally going to feel tighter. Now, your phasic muscles are available on demand. It's like, I'll be over here on the couch. Let me know when you need me. Okay, so they're very good at resting. They're able to rest completely, but they don't work unless they have to. Like they need to be recruited, right? They need to be told, okay, my postural muscles are getting tired. I'm doing a larger movement. I'm staying in a posture for longer. I'm getting tired over here. You need to kick in and give me some help over here. So, or again, if there's speed involved, they'll kick in. So they can be very fast to act, but if you never use them, then they're not ready for that. So I hope that makes sense. Okay, so let's go back to postural. They tend to be made of slower, which I kind of mean slimmer, slow twitch endurance type fibers. So these are your red fibers. They're just a different kind. They use aerobic energy, and that's because they're endurance fibers. So your postural muscles, they're kind of designed and they're resourced by to have endurance, to stay turned on or be able to turn on again. And they're kind of just sort of holding you upright all day. And so they tend to be endurance type fibers. Now, your phasic muscles tend to be larger muscle fibers, thicker muscle fibers, and they're fast twitch fibers. So they use a different energy system, a glycolytic system. You don't have to remember this, but they're, for speed things, activities, power, when you need more strength, and they can be very fast acting, again, unless you never ask them to turn on. Like if you rarely ask them to turn on, then they're not that fast. We'll look at what happens to them when they get weak. Okay, so back to our postural muscles. They're kind of always on because they're holding you upright, whereas your phasic muscles are used for those larger, more dynamic movement. If we talk about range of control, you would be definitely using phasic muscles. And then your postural muscles, they tend to feel tight, partly because, again, they're of their postural function. They have to have very sensitive receptors, okay? So that means the proprioceptors are feeding the information a lot of, to the brain and spinal cord, all the time. They really, that information gets to the brain and spinal cord consistently, and they're pretty sensitive, these particular postural muscles. And, the body knows that those are the muscles that are holding you up, basically. So they tend to be over-recruited. Again, if you don't do things to make the phasic muscles work, they get weaker. So if we look over here, they tend to get weak when they're not used. So phasic muscles are the ones that get weak. Your postural muscles are the ones that will feel tighter and tighter. If you're not using your phasic muscles, these ones are just going to get used all the time, and they'll be over-recruited. And it's amazing because you could think like, well, why am I over-recruiting these muscles? I'm not doing anything. I'm not stressing my muscles at all, but that's the problem. Your phasic muscles are getting weak, and these muscles are getting overused. Okay, so that starts to be the problem. So your endurance muscles, these postural muscles, they don't tend to atrophy, so they don't really shrink down because they're just being used all the time, right? They're the ones holding you up. And like I say, maybe they're pulling you into poor positions. We're going to look at that. But they don't get a rest is what happens. And so they don't tend to shrink down. Whereas your phasic muscles will, they will lose mass and they're going to lose strength if they're not being used. So we're going to kind of look at both sides of the body and just sort of look at some of these patterns. But here's what happens, okay? Your postural muscles, which kind of naturally feel tighter, people always want to stretch them. They think there's something wrong with them because they feel tight. It's more likely, again, we did this in other videos, we talked about, well, when they get over-recruited, right? If they get over-recruited, if they're always using those endurance muscles, those postural muscles, they're probably going to feel tight because they're not getting any help from the phasic muscles. So people are always, they get tight, now they want to stretch them, and that usually makes the problem worse. And remember that just because muscles feel tight does not mean that they're short, right? If you could get that muscle to just relax or get it to go through its full natural excursion, you would find that its length hasn't changed. It's exactly how it was. It's just that the nervous system is now letting it go into a long position, whereas it wasn't before. So what happens is, because your uprightness is so important to your nervous system, their nervous system is going to interfere with movement to some degree, again, in order to serve you, in order to keep you safe. And then, you're going to feel like you've lost range of motion and you're going to want to stretch, but that just upsets the nervous system even more. Okay, so we'll give you a better solution. So, we can easily wake those larger phasic muscles. I mean, with a posture like this, of course, right? We're using, this is a beautiful functional line pose right here. But, people will really have a hard time in a pose like this if they have not been using or, specifically including postures in their practice that help to bring those muscles along. Okay, so let's look at some of the common patterns.
Kara
Oh,
has a good question here.
okay, Kara's got a question.
How do you explain this to students, though? I find it so difficult to get this concept across when students tell me they need to stretch their tight hips or hamstrings, etc.
Yeah, I think just more conviction. When you are, and you will be really sure about that.
Okay.
She's unmuted, so she'll.
in taking this course. I'm giving you so much, fuel for that fire.
My sorry, put my video on. My question, I guess, more relates to this idea that I get students all the time who tell me that, they come to yoga because they just want to stretch their tight muscles. And
Yeah,
when I try to explain to them that we're going to work in class, they don't come back because they weren't coming to work. They were coming to stretch.
yeah.
So I haven't quite
Don't
mastered
tell them.
that.
Don't tell them.
Okay.
Don't tell them. I don't know, like, if you've seen in the course, like, I talk a lot about activation at end range,
Mhm.
right? So we're turning on muscles rather than letting go.
Mhm.
And we might not be quite at our end range. We might be just, this side of our end range. But believe me, if they don't in that moment feel like, because see, a lot of this is the thing, a lot of our students can't tell the difference between an eccentric contraction and a stretch.
Mhm.
They can't tell the difference. So if you're eccentrically contracting and loading, like, is kind of what I'm suggesting, they're going to have more range of motion from doing that.
Okay.
And so you could say something like, well, awesome, we're going to do a lot of active stretching, which has been shown to have much better outcomes than passive stretching.
Okay.
So, active stretching is a good word to use, or eccentric loading. Again, there's just a ton of research on the benefits of eccentric loading in terms of maintaining joint health and range of motion. So, if you put it that way, because I would say they probably can't discern the difference in sensation, at least not at first. Maybe after a while. But again, I've had to convince lots of people over the years. My favorite thing. So,
Well, I
but
feel like teaching just like a regular vinyasa flow
uh-huh.
is like an advanced class now. Like even just getting them to flow from warrior one to warrior two feels like I'm asking too much of my students these days because I haven't taught them yet the stabilization principles, or they haven't quite mastered that. So
Right.
I've had to dial my teaching back so much that I'm wondering, like, at what point do they get this concept that we can move forward? But I guess it just takes time.
Yeah, I hear you, Kara. I work, I've had just a great year in working with some people who, like, some gymnasts and other people who have, like, work with weight training and stuff like that. So they're sort of different. And again, they, of course, to the gymnasts, maintaining their range of motion is really important. But they're also so good at applying the activations that I'm teaching that they're just so euphoric after class.
Right.
It's so funny because they're really appreciating the activation because they feel it in their body, for a
Right.
couple of days. And the thing is too, people will walk out and they'll feel like, okay, like my body feels like it's been really well stretched or whatever, the joints just feel like they're inviting movement and everything feels lubricated and all of that. And then, as it's probably, takes a little while. And as you say, you're like trying to help them get it. But, ultimately, like, if people are used to a more flow style, I don't know. I guess I haven't really encountered a lot of people who are, like, really locked into, the way they practice and they don't want to change anything about it. Most people, I mean, Not naming any names, but I find sometimes more of an Ashtanga based group is like that because they're drawn to it because they like the sort of dogma of it. They like that strict, adherence to patterns, but and that's fine. But most people like a different kind of stimuli. They enjoy having a different stimuli for even movements that they're familiar with, but then you bring a different sort of focus to it. And they will feel it. They'll feel like they are, oh, okay, something has to pay attention and turn on here, and most people really enjoy that. It really draws them into themselves and expands their breath. And, they usually make a really deep connection. So anyways, I would just encourage you, and again, probably your own conviction and you'll learn ways of just sort of using words that will resonate with them so they get it. You're not going to lose range of motion. Don't worry about that. We're going to be very effective at maintaining and increasing range of motion by using eccentric loading and activation. I don't think it'll take long to prove it. All right, Kara. Okay, do you want to move that off? Okay, let's look at some of these patterns. These are the ones that Dr. Janda had identified. And, a lot of manual therapists will use this, and Rolfers and different people. I think it's a very useful concept, but again, I feel like we can focus on this a little too much, so I'm just giving you a little tiny introduction to it. It will probably help you understand our body's natural tendencies, and if that's all it does, then that's perfect. We don't want to get too attached to any particular model of understanding the body, because at some point all models break down. That's just all there is to it. Okay, but this is going to help you understand a few things. So we have, as I said, we have phasic muscles and postural muscles. Remember, your upright posture is, it's the human being, super important posture. So that'll help you to remember that postural muscles are those more endurance type muscles. Okay. And then you just know the other one is the more power strength muscles, except when they get weak. Okay. So I've got phasic and postural here. And I would say, you can think of it this way too: powerful, but lazy. You probably know people like that, right? Like really powerful, but prefer to lie around, and you have to, they're quite willing to get going, but they, just as happy sitting down. So that's your phasic muscles. Okay. They're powerful, but they're not going to go to work unless you specifically ask them. Okay. So we just have to make sure that we give them a reason to turn on in the practice. So here's some examples, because, obviously things like head forward posture are very prevalent, right? We see so much of that, and we do need to address it in our classes. And we can do that very simply. I've given you lots of instruction on that throughout the course, but we'll just look at some of these. So your deep neck flexors, not the ones on top here, but the deep ones, those are phasic, and they're part of the deep front line. Okay, the really deep neck flexors are part of the deep front line. Now on the other side of the neck, just opposite them, you've got these postural muscles, and their postural muscles tend to be those wiry, tend to be deeper. Not every single time though, okay? So you can't really stick to that rule, unfortunately, but they're wiry in nature and tend to be hyperactive, right? They're always on. Okay, so now you've got some of those in the upper traps, right? How many people go around with their shoulder girdle lifted all day? Your upper traps are wiry, hyperactive postural muscles. And they just happen to be part of the back arm line, which we're going to be looking at next time. Also, levator scapula. Your levator scapula, basically probably this muscle right here, attaches to the top goes under your traps, attaches to the top of the scapula. Again, It's a postural muscle. Upper traps, levator scapula, they tend to be tight. They tend to want to lift the shoulder girdle. They're wiry and hyperactive. The deep neck flexors could really help you in activating your core and stuff, but they're kind of lazy. They're not going to turn on unless you ask them to. I always suggest like a slight chin tuck to help get them active. And then we're going to move down a little bit. So now it's going to flip. Now you've got some wiry, hyperactive postural muscles, and these are the larger SCM muscles and the upper part of your pectorals. So when you think about people going into head forward posture, these are the muscles that kind of want to pull you into that position. And the reason they do that is because on the other side, you've got some powerful but lazy muscles. So you don't have balance, right? The postural muscles need some phasic help, front to back, to help balance out the stress and the recruitment. So you've got some powerful but lazy muscles in the lower traps. So the lower traps, which would be down here, actually, this one here, goes down into almost all the way down to the lower back, but quite a ways down. Those muscles, if they were working well, that would help people avoid lifting the shoulder girdle. If the lower traps would do their job, they would keep the scapula down on the back a little bit further. So you know when you hear the cue in yoga of like pressing the shoulders down and everything, they're trying to get these lower traps to turn on. The other muscle here is the serratus anterior. So these basically serrated edge muscles that actually also stabilize the scapula. So, you know, stabilizing your scapula in yoga is pretty important, isn't it? Like for downward facing dog, any overhead movement, doing chaturanga or plank or anything like that. This is what we're attempting to do with the hand to core connection. It's hand to set the shoulder to stabilize the scapula on the trunk of the body. So if we use organization and activation, we're going to be able to turn on these powerful but lazy muscles. Okay, and that helps to stabilize the shoulder blade and the whole shoulder girdle and the shoulder in its socket. Okay, let's move a little bit further down. And here, we can all relate to this, are our abdominal muscles, which are powerful but lazy. They're phasic muscles. That's just who they are. Okay, so we all notice, right, that we have to keep turning our abdominals on. It always seems to take some conscious effort. Now, we might be able to maintain a certain level of tone if we've been practicing ujjayi breathing and, using our core a lot, especially in movement. If we relate core activation to movement, then we probably, are getting them to be a little less lazy. But, that is, again, who they naturally are. So the abdominals are part of the superficial front line and these functional lines that we're looking at today. Okay, and they are Phasic. Now we'll go on the opposite side, the low back. Everybody complains about their low back, don't they? Not everybody, but a lot of people. It's pretty prevalent. And those low back extensors here under this tissue, actually, they're part of the superficial back line, and they are wiry and hyperactive. So again, if you don't have abdominals that like to participate in stabilizing the core, you're going to have wiry, hyperactive back extensors, and that's going to contribute to low back movement restriction and potentially pain and discomfort. And then you've got some really deep QLs, quadratus lumborum muscles that are deep toward the back of the trunk as well, and those are part of the deep front line. These are the ones that if you've ever had like a little back spasm as you turn over in bed or something, it's often the QLs that do that. So they again are known to be hyperactive and wiry. And they're actually part of the deep front line just because the deep front line is like the whole core of the body, basically. So it includes structures that are more forward and structures that are more toward the back of the body. Okay, we'll just look at one more relationship here. And these are wiry, hyperactive postural muscles. the rectus femoris. So this is your one quadricep, the quads in the front of the thigh, that crosses the hip joint. So it goes across the knee to the lower leg, and it crosses your hip joint. It's actually attached to the bone of your pelvis. Okay, so and people will often talk, here's another hip flexor. Sorry, I'm just making the psoas and iliacus, right? Everybody knows there's psoas, it's very deep on the spine, your deepest hip flexor, and the iliacus, which is kind of a partner to the psoas. So these three muscles are kind of, a lot of people will complain about them being tight or tender, or, they quiver when they do something like boat pose or something like that. So again, these are our wiry hyperactive muscles, important postural muscles. And then on the other side of that, we have our powerful but lazy muscles, phasic muscles, and those are the glutes, and we think of, these glutes are big muscles. And yeah, they are. They're big, powerful muscles, and they're part of the back functional line, but they're also part of the lateral line. So automatically, when we use organization and activation, we're turning these guys on. So we're already, just a simple like that, we're already, lighting up our phasic muscles of the functional line on the back side. So let's just sort of sit with that. I want to see these blue ones that are all wiry and hyperactive. And I could have made much longer lists, okay? Just so you know, I just gave a couple of examples of each one. There could be many more. But these ones are the ones that people will often complain about. And they may obviously not use their proper names or whatever, but people often have tight neck muscles. They'll often have, they'll say they have tight shoulders, but what it really is like those tight upper pecs, low back tightness. People often complain about that. And then the hip flexors. So these are common muscles, but as I said, they're postural muscles. Postural muscles always feel tighter than phasic muscles. And as long as your phasic muscles turn on, because you've been getting them to turn on, then you're going to maintain the balance between these two types of muscles. Okay. So let's go back to just kind of considering the full body fascial lines and just do a little bit more comparison, because as I said, it's not like all the phasic muscles are in the functional lines. We have phasic muscles in our full body fascial lines too. So let's just have a quick look at that. And depending on their function, which we'll review right now, you'll see that they will have maybe half postural muscles and half phasic, or they'll be mostly postural. So it just depends on what the real function of this line is, what its main function. And remember, again, I just have a little reminder here that upright posture, I would say upright posture, walking, and squatting are the most primary human movements. And you can see that doesn't include any arm work. And we haven't gotten to the arm lines yet. And yet, we've been practicing with organization and activation for the arms. But we'll come full circle by next time. So when you look at all of these full body lines, the arms are never included. And that's because it's really about, upright posture. You can stand upright and you can walk, you can squat without the use of your arms, obviously. But of course, we have arms. The arms are our tools, basically, give us access to using tools. Okay, so let's just kind of, again, we're just going to use this comparison. I just love when all our concepts kind of come together, and that's what's happening today. So here's our fascial lines across the top here. And we have an example of each of them. So our superficial back line, its shorthand name was the backbone of the body, right? Backbone. So its function is uprightness. That's its main function. And we pretty much have all postural muscles. And the reason why it says tonic here is because this is what Dr. Janda referred to as because they tend to be tighter. But like I say, I personally, I would use the word tone this is a good word, but most people aren't really familiar with it. So something is hypertonic. It means that it's being activated by the nervous system more, okay? But what it feels like is tighter, but it's the tone is higher, okay? Hope that isn't confusing. So our superficial back line are mainly, your calf muscles are mainly postural muscles. Your hamstrings, mainly postural. That's why they feel tight. They're supposed to be tight. It's hard to get used to that idea. I know. Your deep back extensors are obviously holding you upright. And, your back of your neck muscles holding the head up. So all of these muscles are predominantly postural muscles. And they're high tone muscles, hyperactive muscles. Okay, then we'll look at the superficial front line, and its shorthand name is the shield, referring to mainly the core of it, the shield of the body. Its function is protective, especially this part, the middle part, but also your hip flexors. And that's its main function, and most of these muscles are phasic. Okay, so you're going to have not rectus abdominis, but the rest of the quads, rectus femoris, rectus femoris, not that one. Rectus femoris is a wiry postural muscle. Okay, I hesitate to say this, but some of you, if you've studied the body before, you might already know this, and so you might be thinking about it. Usually muscles that cross multiple joints are often postural. Anyway, so that's rectus femoris is postural, but all the other ones are phasic. Rectus abdominis, all the other quads, tibialis anterior here, these are all phasic. Okay, powerful but lazy until you ask them to turn on. So here's the lateral line. This is the main stabilizers of the body, the main stabilizer, those lines. Its function is stability, especially, lateral stability, keep you moving forward. And you're going to see both postural and phasic muscles here. Okay, peroneals, I'm pretty sure those are postural. This is just fascia, TFL, pretty sure that's postural. Although you've got some obliques, and part of the obliques are phasic and part of them are postural. So, and these are postural. So again, you don't need to know this, but especially for the functional lines, if you think about those as mainly phasic and like, how do I get those to turn on so that I make sure my students are using them so we keep a balance between the postural and phasic muscles. So it's as simple as that. I just like splitting hairs myself. Here's the postural lines. This one's a little bit blurry, but again, these are about movement, right? So dynamic stabilizers, movement stabilizers. Obviously, its main function is movement, especially walking. And you're going to have mostly phasic muscles here, mostly. And again, you can have, like I say, especially when you've got muscles that cover a large area, some of those fibers will be phasic and some will be postural. Sorry, I didn't design the body. That's how it is. And like I say, we're talking about predominantly, and we're generalizing. We're not, the model isn't 100% perfect. The body really, it never lets us do that. Okay, and let's look at the deep front line. So this is our myofascial core. Core stability is its main function. And so mostly postural is what you're going to find in the deep front line muscles. Except for these ones up here, strangely. These ones up here are phasic. But again, you don't need to remember that. So again, it depends, like form follows function. Your body is going to have strategically placed certain types of muscles so that the body functions better. You're going to have postural muscles where anti-gravity is necessary. And you're going to have phasic muscles where additional power and strength is going to be necessary. So that's how smart our designer is. Okay, so I'm going to circle back for a moment. There's more mind-blowing stuff here in a moment. If you have any questions, feel free to wave me down or put it in the chat. Okay, so we've been learning how tensioning the fascial lines through organization and activation, right, which is foot to core and hand to core. This helps us develop stability first, then strength, and then range of control. Okay, those are our main, again, overarching principles. And we're doing that by using the fascial lines, and we make those hand to core, foot to core, body as one piece connections. Okay, so that is about connection. Now, we do that by basic activations in manageable postures. Table pose, standing upright. Then we practice them until they become habits. So practice, 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 so you know how to turn these things on and you can sustain them for a bit, and then start to challenge a little bit. So I'm going to show you some examples of that. Well, actually, here's some examples. So, you could go from a basic activation in just a regular little squat, a chair pose or something. And then you start to challenge it. Maybe you go into a little toe stand. Or you go, I'll show you later, like table pose. There's lots of ways of increasing the challenge in table pose. You could go into just a basic warrior pose. Anybody who enters a basic warrior pose, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, this is doable. It doesn't require extraordinary range of motion or anything. But if you stay there, right, if you stay there, do a warrior pose practice for 3 minutes, 3 minutes of warrior pose. You'll find out that you're going to use some phasic muscles. Actually, those will kick in probably after about 5 breaths. You'll start using your global muscles, your larger muscles, your phasic muscles. You're going to have to use them because your endurance muscles will get tired. And, something like this where you could actually lift that knee and then touch it down and lift that knee and touch it down. So moving in and out of postures is a new challenge. It gives a little bit of variety. And what's that about? Is that just keeping your students interested, or is it giving them something new to try in their body and see if they can still keep it together? Can I still keep my balance? Can I still ujjayi breath? Like what's the new challenge in my body? This keeps people very focused. They don't really have time to make grocery lists, when they're working with this kind of balance and activation. And then, you can even add little extra challenges with straps or something like that. I do lots of things like that. I use straps and blocks more as like a new variety or a new load or challenge. And some people use them as props as well. Like, they're there available, but it's kind of fun when you know how students sometimes don't use props when they should. But if everybody has props and we're using them in all kinds of different ways, then they're much more open to actually using a prop when they need one, And I always, again, it's very important, I think, to keep the sort of the tone of the class is about experimenting, right? Experimenting with things, feeling things in your body, noticing, reconnecting kind of forgotten corners, integration. Like, this is what we're focusing on. It's not like, how high can I get my leg? You know what I mean? We're focusing on other aspects of our embodied experience. Okay. So now all of this is sort of like a skeleton sketch of what we're trying to do in the course. I mean, yes, there's all these other things that will help us to know as teachers, but you may not tell them all to your class. Depends on the class. I've had lots of classes who just love hearing various anatomical, things of interest or whatever. And then some people, that's just not the kind of experience that they're coming for. And it doesn't matter because it helps us build a class, right? Knowing all of these things. It helps us know these are our priorities, right? Whether we're teaching new or experienced students, seniors or children's, even seniors need to train the functional lines. Guys, I'm a senior. I'm training my functional lines, every single class because I want my hips to work, in another 20 years or 40 years maybe. Okay, so here's some main takeaways from the front and back functional lines. And those of you who maybe like went and watched the functional lines video, or there's a palpation exercise, and then there's the attunement exercise, sequence. I know I'm talking about slightly different things, but that's my purpose on these coaching calls, is just to give you a little bit more. It's not like required learning, if you don't remember everything I say, but some of it's going to land with you because you're probably experiencing this in your own body or with your own students. So now I'm going to just give you some main takeaways, and then I have a little bit more for you. So this concept of the front and back functional lines, and again, I'll circle back, predominantly when you're doing a stronger movement and when you're doing balancing, inversions, doing something like against gravity, like plank or anything like that, any of these cross body movements, you're going to be using your functional lines, front and back, for that kind of thing. And whenever you're using your functional lines, you're using phasic muscles. So that's good. But again, let's just think about the main concept here. So the functional lines are predominantly phasic, predominantly in function, and only turn on when needed. So we need to make sure we're giving them a reason to turn on in our class. Okay? You could, if you think about your front functional line, especially being, those abdominals, okay? And then, adductors, I guess those are hip flexors as well. So you could be sitting on a chair like this, sitting up very tall, and just lifting the leg. You would notice that if you lifted a leg without activating the front functional line, your pelvis would change position. Your pelvis would spill backward. If you want to stay upright like this, you're going to have to turn on your front functional line to lift that leg. So you see, you don't have to be doing like a standing balancing pose. You can train the functional lines in a chair. You can train the functional line holding onto the wall. It's just, you use whatever support you need, stay in postures and positions you can manage that you're not going to fall out of or anything like that. But it's just like knowing that, okay, knowing I need to activate these functional lines. So what are some ways that I can activate them? This is how we think of it. The functional lines give strength to our levers. Like if this thigh was down and you just put the knee forward, you really wouldn't need your core turning on. But when you bring the whole leg up like that, now you need that. And that's really easy to prove in your own body. Okay, so giving strength to the levers, their connection to the main engines of the body, which are the hip and shoulder, and then into the core as well. Functional lines are key to stabilizing single leg standing balances. Amazing. And again, even seniors need to be practicing those, one finger to the wall or a finger on a chair. If they are doing a single leg standing balance, they're going to be, and you hold them there for a little bit, they'll be using their functional lines. Staying in postures a little bit longer. Guys, there is just so much fantastic research and information coming out about isometric training. So staying in postures for longer is just amazingly strengthening for the body, but also really illuminating the in terms of like knowing where you have a weakness or an imbalance, or where you need more like nervous input, or if you want to change a habit. We talked about this on earlier coaching calls, when if you have sort of a faulty habit that you might have exposed in your practice, or when you started using organization and activation, in order to change a habit, use this tool, like hold positions for longer. And you will turn on your phasic muscles, and you're going to start building balance between your phasic and postural muscles. It's very simple. Training muscles in yoga, though, does require conscious awareness, because people could do, flow practices. especially like a flow practice, that the other sort of aspect of the practice would be hanging on joints and letting go, a part of it. But they're not probably going to kick on their Phasic muscles. So if you can get people to slow down a little bit, you don't have to take the flow out, because you can use the flow to challenge their stability, right? Their dynamic stability. But, you can hold them in postures for longer, and they'll realize what that's doing to their body. Like, there's no escape. Well, they may not like it at first, but most people that I've worked with ever, they just love it. They just feel so much stronger. And then they get really connected, and, stability and everything is coming too. So, okay, so training Phasic muscles in yoga does, you have to be intentional about it. You can turn any pose into a pose that requires both their Phasic and postural muscles. This is just, holding it for longer. Or a lot of times I'll say press down into your feet, press down more. And then activate more, press more. Whenever I have my fingers laced, whether they're over the head or behind me or what have you, or a bind, pull the fingers apart. Pull the fingers apart, and you'll activate your arm lines. So, that is going to make your Phasic muscles become part of the posture. So those are some simple things. And we're going to look at a whole bunch of them. And the functional lines are important to all students, okay? Experienced yogis who want to do complex advanced poses, they really need to understand how to use their functional lines. And if they're not using them, in other postures or practices, that will probably have to come first before they can achieve something more advanced. And even seniors. So I know a lot of you are teaching seniors. It's just absolutely fantastic. So just so you're aware, like, I don't have any chair yoga sequences in this course, but, if you have students who are, not able to be on their knees or on the mat, all of this applies to how you would work with a chair, how you would plant the hands on the wall and dial it out, how you would press, thank you. Press into this foot, create a foot to core connection, turn on your front functional line, and then you'll be able to lift the leg. Okay, pull back with the hand on the strap to activate your rear functional line. It's not that different. Whether you're in a chair or you're standing by a chair or using a wall, it's all the same thing. And I think if you know what you're reaching for, what you're trying to do is stay in postures a little bit longer, so there's more of a challenge and you have to get more muscles to turn on. And then think about your cross body connections in the front and in the back. That is pretty much going to help you activate your functional lines. Okay.
You kind of answered this already, but just to make sure, Aileen asks again, when we stay long in a pose, like Warrior One, and the muscles are shaking, are these then the Phasic help muscles that are doing the shaking?
Okay. Yeah, this is a great question. What's happening when you're holding a pose for longer and the muscles, start to quiver? Okay. So this is generally it's recruitment. So when you either just hold a posture for longer, you're going to say you used to holding it for 5 breaths and now you're going for 10 breaths, then the muscles that used to do the pose no problem with 5 breaths, they're getting tired and they need to tap out. They need, other muscles to kick on. And this is kind of the way all your muscles work. They work synchronistically. So they kind of work like this. One of them will turn on, and as they turn off, somebody else is coming on. Okay, so as you kind of make that transition from maybe mostly your initial endurance fibers to your Phasic muscles, there might be a little bit of, quivering or jerkiness, just because you have to use a new pattern, right? You're using a new recruitment pattern. So your muscles have to, like, they're not all, they're spelling each other off. Okay, so there's the spelling off, which again, if it's something new, that's going to be a bit bumpy. And then when you hold it for longer, it's going to be a little bit bumpy because, again, you're recruiting, you're figuring out, okay, well, if I'm staying here this long, what are the next muscles to come on and the next ones and whatever. So, within each muscle itself, there's, muscle fiber groups are spelling each other off. And then when you transition from just using those like deep hip external rotators or something to using your more larger phasic muscles, there's going to be like a sort of a transitional learning time. That's when your nervous system goes into learning mode. And a lot of times all that extra movement is just the nervous system trying to get more information and figure out a new pattern. And if you repeat the pattern, it smooths right out. And you've probably noticed that. So that's how I would explain that. Okay? All right.
Yes, lots of positive nodding.
Nodding. Okay. Nodding is good. Okay. Now, major mind-blowing connection here. You may have made it already. Functional lines, so mainly phasic muscles. I think Aylin was sort of alluding to this question. So these functional lines, which are mainly phasic muscles, larger global, lazy but powerful muscles, do not limit your range of motion. If you or your student has limited movement around a joint, can't move all into a full range, it's because of the postural muscles. When people come to you and they'll say something like, okay, my fill in the blank, okay, my muscles are too tight. They rarely ever identify muscles like, they don't say my glutes are just way too tight or my abs are way too tight or my triceps are way too tight, right? They would probably never identify that because those are phasic muscles. So they're the larger, more powerful, but tend to be lazy phasic muscles. So they're not the ones that feel tight, right? They're the ones, and they're not going to restrict your movement. When they talk about tightness, they're going to talk about their tight hamstrings, yeah? Tight piriformis, if they know that. That's that deep external hip rotator that we sit on in pigeon, okay? So that a lot of people feel that really strongly in pigeon. So that's your piriformis. Hip flexors, people will talk about, their psoas, their rectus femoris. Tight calves, people will complain about. Tight low back. Those are all postural muscles. And postural muscles, why do they feel tighter? Their job is to hold you up. So they're tighter to begin with. And it's not so much that they're tight, like if you were to go under anesthetic, the muscles would not be tight. They're only tight because the nervous system is activating them. And the nervous system does that because those are the muscles that are responsible for holding you upright. And uprightness is very, very, very important to your nervous system. Okay? So they're just always going to be turned on. They never get a break. If your phasic muscles are not helping out, these ones are going to get tighter and more over-recruited. They're going to feel tighter. I don't mean that they're actually tighter or shorter or anything, even though you'll see these words used, but that's just not an accurate way to express it. They're more tonic, right? They've got a higher tone, and they feel tight. Like that's what the sensation is like. It's going to restrict your movement. Okay, so when the phasic muscles are weak, the postural muscles get overworked, and then they feel extra tight. And they try to protect themselves. So that's what the nervous system is doing. Again, it's in service to you, is trying to protect you, trying to protect the joints and the tendons and all of that, trying to give these overworked muscles relief. And what they'll do is limit range of motion if necessary. Okay? So, if you have tight hamstrings, maybe, your glutes are just not there. And, you would see that, right, in more collapsed postures, when people let their pelvis dump forward, or their pelvis anteriorly tilt or something, especially like pelvis forward, it's your hamstrings are, you're hanging on your joints, and your hamstrings are really going to have to kick on because you don't have any other muscular support there. You're just hanging on your joints. So, they're not going to be happy if you try to stretch them. Okay. Let your knees bend. Okay. If you have people that they're going to posteriorly tilt like that every time they try to flex their hip, then just get them to bend their knees. Like, flexing the hip is very important, but doing it with the knees super straight is not. So don't get into a tug of war with your hamstrings. Just let the knees bend. If you start to balance the phasic and postural muscles, if you use organization and activation, if you use activation at end range, you will have more range. Your nervous system will stop interfering with the flexion of your hip. It's going to feel more comfortable. Your body's going to be receptive to it. Okay. So, until then, let your knees bend. Just keep working on balance. Work on your phasic muscles. Work on your glutes and your abs. That will help your hamstrings, believe it or not. Work on your feet. That will help your hamstrings. Make sure your arch is not collapsing. Make sure your feet are strong. That's going to help your hamstrings. Okay. Same thing with tight psoas. Like, if the psoas feels tight, it might seem like it would make sense to hang on it like this so you could stretch it. But I guarantee that is just going to make it really angry, and you don't want an angry psoas. So instead, you would pull up. Pull your legs into your pelvis. Squeeze your glute. Get tall. That is going to, abs, okay? Pubic bone to breastbone. That's going to give your psoas the break that it needs, okay? Because it's got other muscles that are assisting with the joint action, okay? So I know it's it's the simplest thing. I know everybody from physical therapists to yoga teachers to gymnasts and whatnot, it seems really like the thing to do to stretch a tight muscle, but it rarely ever works. And if it does work, it's probably something else changed to to give that muscle some relief, something. But if you just work on this balance of between your postural and phasic muscles, it'll be better. Okay, so now here again, this is me distillation happening right here. Essentially, the weak, lazy, inhibited phasic muscles are the problem with tight muscles. Okay, so that means that limited range of motion. Everybody understand what limited range of motion is? My hips are too tight, my shoulders too tight, is a weakness problem, not a flexibility problem. I'm going to let that sink in. Limited range of motion is a weakness problem, not a flexibility problem. So in other words, it's not because you're not stretching enough. It's because it's a result of not using the full range regularly enough so that the phasic muscles have to turn on, right? Not strengthening through the full range of control. Okay, we're working with order of progression, stability, strength, mobility, regardless of who the student is. And all students need to work their phasic muscles, work their functional lines, as well as their postural muscles, okay? And so we're going to develop stability by dialing it out, okay? Our hand to core, foot to core, body as one piece activation. We develop strength by adding a new challenge, and that's where the functional lines really come into to being used, okay? So always here again, we show like this is a progression. Somebody learns how to activate their arms to their core in a basic table pose. They're going to add a new challenge in this next version, right? Lifting opposite arm and legs. There's actually a lot going on in this pose. Pressing down into this foot to create a foot to core connection, hand to core connection. If you stay here for a few breaths, I guarantee, you know, a lot of us do the knee and elbow under the body, and we go back and forth a few times. That's nice to do. It's nice to do with the breath and all of that. But if you hold the arm and the leg and do that for 5 breaths, you're really going to have to use your phasic muscles. So you're going to have to connect this hip to the opposite shoulder, this shoulder to the opposite hip. You're going to have to turn on your front functional line, because those abs won't turn on by themselves. That's just not how they are. They're phasic muscles. You're going to have to think about it and get them active. So this is a great challenge. There's so many different things you can do in this position. If you're working with students who can't be on their knee, they could be standing with a hand on a chair or other object. So you know, this pose is available to pretty much everybody in some way, shape, or form. They don't have to be so horizontal. They could be more upright and lifting. I mean, just standing upright, lifting an arm and a leg. You know, try it right now and you'll see, oh yeah, that requires something. We need something to do that. So, you know, that's how you would teach a senior. Keep them upright. They can hold their chair, you know, arm and leg best they can, whatever range of motion they have, because you're not going to get more range of motion until you start to balance the phasic and the postural muscles. I hope that's making sense, because the postural muscles are always going to pull you into, you know, less range of motion, because they're trying to protect, because they're not getting help from the phasic muscles. So you want to make sure you're using phasic, and just start wherever you are. Just get them to turn on however it looks. Okay. And then, you know, from here, you could advance to standing on a foot, making a cross-body connection, hip to shoulder, hip to shoulder. So any student needs to work with this, mastering the activations in a really basic pose, and then take them into a more advanced or more, what are advanced poses? You know, it's just like, give the body a new challenge. There's something to learn with every single new position. That's a new way to breathe, a new way to activate. Okay. And then, when you're doing that, you're showing them a basic activation that transcends every posture and every type of movement. And that way your students are ready, right, for whatever life throws in their path. Like, this is very important to have your students experimenting with their body. That way they can problem solve on their own when they're out in their life. They have to lift something particularly heavy or do something kind of awkward. They'll know how to set themselves up so that their body is connected as one piece, and their shoulders and hips are in a good position, and now they can apply their strength. These are very, very, very practical ideas that I'm giving you. So I think that was my last slide. Oh, no, it's not. Okay. So when we balance the postural and phasic muscles and all the fascial lines, here's what happens. Here's where we're going. We get better upright posture, right? Because balance between front and back. Better joint centration, right? That's what using our fascial lines and this tensegrity nature of the body gives us better joint centration. The joint is seated in its socket or its plateau or whatever it is, ideally. And then better dynamic stability, right? You're more stable in movement, more stable in held postures. This gives you movement confidence. You're willing to try other things. Gives you stronger tissues, because we are building tissue with these activations. This is really, really key. And we're directing the way those tissues are being built. That's module 2. So you'll learn about that there. And then, you're going to have more range of control because you just have better control and you have better balance between your postural and phasic muscles. Okay. And your nervous system will let you have control, will let you have more range of motion. Okay. And that's the kind of mobility we want, right? Like, a lot of people, say, yeah, I really got to improve my flexibility. That's just their way of saying that they don't want to feel so restricted. So your teacher brain could say, Okay, yeah, we're going to do that. I'm going to teach you how to organize and activate. We're going to activate at end range. We're going to, do all these different challenges. But what you say to them is like, you will absolutely increase your range of motion. You might want to already educate them a little bit about what that means. And, like I say, if you've got students who want to do some stretching, just say, yeah, we do a lot of active stretching or something like that, just so, again, like meet the student where they're at. You understand what they want. Nobody wants a lot of range of motion and then no control over their movement. Nobody wants that. They would know intuitively that they would be prone to injury, right? So nobody wants that. Everybody wants movement ability and grace and control. That's what people want. Even if they can't really articulate it like that, that's what people want. So you just have to find a way to keep them encouraged until they start making their own discoveries within their body, which they will, guarantee you. And, just encourage them until until that happens. And they may get it right away. I've had students who just like their first class, they were just like, that was different. And I'm really feeling that I was able to do things I didn't think I could do. So, that there's the possibility of that experience. And people might get a bit sore, but most people I know, when they get a bit sore, they're like, oh, okay, I must have really done some new things or activated something new. If you're working with people who are kind of afraid, like, I don't know, maybe if they've been injured or seniors or whatever, really, they don't know what that signifies, right? What does muscle soreness signify? So you just got to let them know, wow, you really got into some, new muscles that you haven't been using or whatever, and make sure they understand that this is actually a good thing. There's quite a difference, of course, between muscle soreness and I couldn't move my knee for 3 days. That's a different problem, obviously. But, a little bit of sensation after, after the class, or usually it'd be the next day or something like that, is okay. And, we're not trying to build Rome in a day, right? We're working incrementally. That's why we talk about progressive overload and, very, very small increments. But, people notice those little changes in their body, and that's what keeps them coming back and encouraged. If they never see any change, they lose interest and it gets frustrating. But if they're seeing, they're feeling stronger, they feel like, okay, well, I actually was able to do that, then, that is highly encouraging. So, I do want to encourage you to apply all of this. And I know that, this is a heavy course. And just so you know, I have some fantastic students here who have been through the course 3 or 4 times. They just keep listening to, the lessons and the coaching calls and doing the sequences and stuff, because, as you go through, new insights are going to come, and then you go teach your students and new insights are going to come from that. And you come back to the course and you see things in a different way. So, there's lots of levels to go through. So yeah, that is my last slide. Okay, so.
Donna kind of mentioned, I don't know if you want to say anything, it's
okay.
just a comment. It's also helpful in just walking upright, looking with eyes ahead, feels the phasic core kick in. Also notice how the diaphragm can expand so much more with ease.
Yeah, so in more of the full body lines, when I go into especially the superficial front line, which is, we're using those abdominal muscles too, like we talked about today. Those are phasic muscles. Eye gaze is very important, like where you're pointing your eyes, like keeping your eyes on the horizon rather than looking down when you're doing walking or balancing or something like that, keeping the eyes on the level. This automatically helps you balance the front and back body, the superficial front line and superficial back line. So yeah, there's, if you I would associate especially the superficial front line and the front functional lines. They're closely associated just because of the rectus abdominis. So that's very important. I mean, rectus abdominis on its own is not the be all end all. You've got 4 layers of abdominal muscles. So, those are important as well. So I won't go in to that right now, but yeah, all these, like, it is balance among the fascial lines. And just knowing it, I felt like in this piece, especially today, to just make you aware that it's important, to do some of these things I'm suggesting. Stay in postures for a bit longer and stay active at end range, and give the body some new challenges so that you're actually getting your phasic muscles to turn on. Because when they're strong, you don't have all of these other tight muscle issues. So you're creating balance from that. All right, any other questions?